From the WNIN Public Media Center in downtown Evansville, I'm David James, and this is 2 Main Street. Our tri-state area is blessed with fertile farms, abundant harvests, and hardworking families who till the soil. Today, much of the heavy lifting down on the farm is done by high-tech and, yes, very expensive equipment. But in pioneer days, a farmer relied on horses, oxen, a wooden plow, and back-breaking labor to bring in the crops. In her book, The Bone and Sinew of the Land, author Annalisa Cox, who was a guest on this show, writes about clearing the trees and then battling the roots, which were a second forest under the ground. Farmers using a single-blade plow and an axe would have to walk 9 miles to plow just 1 acre. Farmers soon learned horses were not strong enough to pull the plow to clear the land, so they needed oxen. Well, the Grahams were one of those early pioneer families settling in Daviess County, Indiana in 1826. Life was hard, but the soil was rich and the harvests plentiful. And from that first 120-acre farm, the Grahams helped change the landscape of agribusiness in America. The Graham family legacy, in the words of my guest, is a story of American grit. Michael E. Keller is the author of The Graham Bradley Tractor, A History. The book follows the family's fortunes and setbacks through world wars, recessions, boons and busts, as the Graham stamp appears on glass bottles, farm tractors and trucks, even automobiles like the Blue Streak. Eventually, the Graham family saga that begins in southern Indiana ends up in New York City with the purchase of Madison Square Garden, the basketball Knicks, and the hockey Rangers. Quite a story. Now let's meet the author of the Graham Bradley Tractor History, Michael Keller. I really enjoyed your book, especially those old advertisements about these tractors.
Well, thank you very much. It's an honor to be here, and I love telling the Graham story, the Graham legacy. It's such a true and sincere American story of work and reward and hardships and joy and going through a depression, which almost stopped them, like it almost stopped much others. What I wanted to do is explain that I've got 3 Graham Page automobiles made in 1929. I wrote 2 books called The Graham Legacy, Graham Page to 1932, and The Graham Legacy, Graham Page from 1932, which covered the Graham family history. It focused on the automobiles and then into the post-war period after the Grahams had left, and that's the point where Madison Square Garden and the sports teams comes in. But when If you sat back and looked at me 3 years ago and said, Michael, you're going to be writing a book about tractors, I would have laughed out loud because I have no experience with tractors. I never even sat in a tractor until 2019. It's nice, but I didn't know that much about it. But what happened is that during the Depression, after the Grahams did so well with the introductory cars, the Depression really hurt them. And in 1936, they seriously considered building a farm tractor. Since they were farm boys from Washington, Indiana, they had experience with that. For those people that are uninitiated like I was, I always say, the Graham brothers didn't fall out of a tree one day in 1936 and decided to build tractors. It was a long time coming, and it was a natural evolution. For example, when the 3 boys were out of college, we had Joseph, you had Robert, and you had Ray. It was almost predetermined that these very precocious people were going to be businessmen like their father. Mm-hmm. The ancestors took that 126 acres and turned it into a 45-acre farm, the Graham Farms, largest farm in Indiana.
4,500 acres.
4,500 acres, the largest farm in Indiana. And when Joseph got out of college, he was alerted to the Lagodi Glass Company, Lithgow Glass Company in Lagodi, and he convinced his father to buy it because he saw some future there. But that's when bottles were blown by hand and by lung power. Mm-hmm. Well, he invented a machine where you could do multiple bodies without weak nets. They were blown upside down, which meant bottlers and mostly breweries could refill them quickly and efficiently. That success was going on with the three Graham brothers. Ray had graduated from the University of Illinois with an agriculture degree, and he wanted to make his father's farm the most scientific, the most efficient, the most modern. And in 1910, he bought a gas traction engine, one of these huge prairie farm engines that weighed several tons. It was a gasoline-driven. It was local news and national news. It was the first gasoline-powered tractor in the state of Illinois. It could do the work of 20 horses and 10 men, all with this one machine. They were very progressive people. Robert, by the way, graduated from Fordham, and he turned into the salesman of the company, the glad hander.
Let's go back to the start here. The patriarch of the family, James Graham.
Yes.
How did he end up in southern Indiana?
Scottish immigrant, and they settled in Kentucky. And the reason he came to Washington is because there was government land for sale, and he bought that on the cheap, the 100 and some acres there. And that's what expanded when he became very, very, very prosperous on that land.
Now, subsistence farming became a business with better equipment, of course,
Yes.
to plow more acres, improvements to wooden plows. Even Thomas Jefferson even had the mold board. You talked about that in your book.
Yes.
And then, of course, that didn't go anywhere, did it?
He said he perfected the plow, which indeed he did not, but he was not a shy and discerning man.
So then we had cast iron plows, but they tended to break, right?
Yes, yes, indeed.
Okay. Now, we have some early innovators you talk about. John Deere, of course, Chris McCormick, the reaper. He invented the McCormick reaper. Jerome Case, the thresher, right? And then we go into the portable steam engine tractors, Nicholas Otto, internal combustible engine, kerosene-powered, John Freilich, gasoline-powered. So a lot's going on with the Industrial Revolution.
That was one of my goals with the book, is that I didn't want to write about 1936, 1937, 1938, and 39. I wanted to put it all in context.
Sure.
So someone reading this book is going to follow the evolution
Right.
of tractor manufacturing and agriculture in the United States and how it got to be where it was when the Grahams said they were going to design a tractor in 1936. They had already done so in 1915. Ray, when they were working on the truck builder and the trucks that became very, very successful, he was also working on a tractor. The prototype came out in 1915. They dealt with the Hercules company to have this, what they call drum drive, one huge rear wheel and two steering wheels in front. Never got beyond the prototype stage. But in 1919, they had brought in other engineers, and the first Graham Brothers tractor came out, which was introduced at the Centennial celebration at Bosse Field. That was all set to go into production, except there was something called World War I. There was the Spanish flu, and a man by the name of Henry Ford who already had 60% of the market, like he did the Model Ts.
So let's talk about the move from Daviess County, Indiana, to Evansville. And I know they had the successful bottling plant, and I think it was in Lagodi. And then, so they wanted, that was doing really well, and they wanted to expand, right?
They could not keep up with demand.
Okay.
And what they did is in 1912, they bought the Citizens Glass Company here in Evansville.
Okay, so that was moved to Evansville.
They kept it going in Lagodi.
Yeah.
They bought the building, cleared it out. They didn't buy it for the business. They bought it for the building.
Okay.
They installed the Graham style and the Graham machines. Later on, again, they could not continue with demand. They had two plants in Oklahoma as well. By 1925, Graham was producing and supplying more bottles of Coca-Cola than any other glass bottle company in the world. What they did is when they came here, and again, they were working on the truck builder, which is a way of taking a Model T and turning it into a light-duty truck, which Ray Graham saw on farms was not available. So they built a tractor factory. They built a truck factory. They had the glass expansion here. They couldn't keep up with any of these products, so who did they turn to? But William McGurty, who had Hercules, which he bought his buggy company from Cincinnati. In your intro, you talked about the hardwoods here and the skilled labor here. There were 141 furniture companies in Evansville when he came here, and there were over 2,000 people working with wood. What better place to make buggies for horses? He was a fantastic entrepreneur. The Hercules Buggy Company expanded into the Syrian Wagon Company, the Warehouse Company, the Gas Engine Company, the Hercules Wagon Company, the paint company. It was a whole big
Sure.
umbrella.
Yeah.
He had 31 acres of downtown Evansville as his factories here. Obviously, they got together. Ray Graham actually became an employee of Hercules when they took that 1915 tractor out to the county fairs and such. They started working together, whereas they couldn't keep up, so Hercules started making bodies and helping them with things. The Grahams eventually became part of the Hercules board of directors, and after Mr. McCurdy became ill and he retired, Joseph Graham became president of Hercules, and it functioned as they went into Serve electrically, which went into Whirlpool, and Evansville was the world's capital of refrigerators at one time.
And
So-
you told me, okay, you live in Wisconsin.
Yes.
now, and you're staying in a Graham property
Yes.
in Evansville?
In Evansville, when they moved from Washington and Lagodi here, again, all three of the men lived here. Joseph Graham had a home, a very, very nice, large home, on Southeast Second Avenue, which is now a bed and
Second
breakfast.
Street, yeah.
Second Street,
Yeah.
sorry.
That's all right.
Second Street. And it's just like walking into 1914. Caitlin and David Hill are gracious hosts. It's just fantastic. I recommend it to anyone.
Now let's meet another tractor guy, Keith Kinney, local collector of all things large, heavy, and mechanical, steam, gas, and horse-drawn. So welcome, Keith.
Thank you.
And before we talk about some of the gems in your collection, including a massive Keck Gonnerman steam-powered tractor made in Mount Vernon, Indiana, any idea how much stuff you actually have?
How much do I have, or how much does my wife know I have?
Oh, okay, there we go. Well, be discreet.
Okay. I've got a dozen or so tractors and 100 plus gas engines and 3 or 4 antique cars and a whole host of other equipment that complements the agricultural collecting manufacturing history of.
Yeah, there's a lot of history involved in your collection. When I went to several of your barns to see these items, I was just overwhelmed. You have a lot of great stuff. And you have a massive new kind of showcase building, and there are a few giants inside, including that Keck Gonnerman Beast. Tell me about that.
Well, Keck Gonnerman was made in Mount Vernon, Indiana. They started in the 1870s. They continued up until the early 1950s. They made steam traction engines, which is a fancy word for a steam tractor, and they made quite a few of them. They are a regional manufacturer, but they made over 2,000 of them, the best we can tell, and they continued to make them a little later than most companies did. Some of the really big ones, like Case, they stopped in the early 1920s, and I think the last steam traction engine that Keck Gonnerman made was in 1931. I have one of the later ones. It was made in 1928. It's 22 horsepower. It weighs 23,000 pounds, and it's a single cylinder, and it was primarily used for belt work, to power like a sawmill or a thrashing machine or a silage filler, something like that.
When did you acquire that machine?
We got that about 10 years ago. That was always my at the top of my bucket list to have one of those, and Keck Gonnerman was my manufacturer of choice, since that's what is mostly around here and kind of what I grew up around. And when finally got to be financially resourceful enough to get one, we found one at an auction over in East Central Ohio that an Amish sawmill had. The boiler is the main component on these that you have to worry about. All the mechanical stuff, the engine and stuff, you can repair, but the boiler, while they can be repaired, are very expensive to work on. And they can be dangerous if you have one that's worn out. So this one had been rebuilt by a nationally acclaimed boiler maker, and it came up on an auction, and we bought it.
Is it operational?
Oh yeah. In fact, it's June right now when we're recording, and this weekend is our annual Antique Club show out at the 4-H Center, and it'll be there operating.
Okay, good deal. Now, of course, Evansville has a rich history of producing buggies
Yes.
and farm equipment and those gas engines. The Hercules plant in the early 1900s did put the city on the country's manufacturing map because it's massive operation. I know they even had cottages built for the employees. They had so many employees
Yeah.
at Hercules, and a lot of them came from Sparta, Michigan.
That's right. William McCurdy, the founder of the Hercules companies, had a relationship with Rosenthal, the one of the owners of Sears and Roebuck, and through that relationship, he started building buggies for Sears. And in 1908, Sears had a machine shop in Sparta, Michigan, the Holmes Foundry and Machine Shop, and they were building gas engines, primarily for use on the farm, and they couldn't keep up with production. So Sears took the plant over in 1912, I believe, contacted William McCurdy and said, hey, you build buggies, great. These guys can't keep up with production. Why don't you take over the gas engine business for us and build those? So he bought the company from Sears and pretty much immediately started building a new factory in Evansville to house the gas engine business.
And of course, the Hercules back in the news recently in October of 2022, fire destroyed the old Hercules warehouse on North Morton Avenue, I believe.
That's right.
Yeah. And you thought there might be some artifacts from Hercules that survived the fire, and you went looking?
I did. In looking at the building, the main office building had a porch or portico on the front, and you could tell it had an archway with stonework, and you could tell it was covered up with, I don't know, aluminum siding, and but you couldn't see what was under it. And I just, in my heart, knew that they had to say Hercules under it. So after the fire, that all collapsed, and I guess 2 days after the fire, I went down there to see what I could learn. And of course, it was heavily patrolled by police and the ATF, and I couldn't get close to it. But the Evansville police officer who was in charge took sympathy on me, and he said, yes, it does say Hercules. I saw it this morning. And he couldn't take me up there, but he took some pictures and sent them to me. So over the next week, it took a lot of string pulling, but I finally got permission to retrieve that sign. It says Hercules offices in I don't know, a foot tall stone letters.
Yeah, they're in stone.
Mm-hmm.
And you have those, and you're going to restore those?
The plan is to restore those, and they will probably go on display at the Evansville Museum of Arts, History, and Science.
Great, great. Now, we talked to Michael Keller about the Graham Bradley family history. Do you have any Graham Bradley products?
You know, I don't. I've seen the tractors. They are beautiful tractors, and there might be one show up in my barn someday. But I've got all three of Michael's books, and it's a wealth of knowledge. And
it is
a lot of local history.
Mm-hmm. Now, of course, by collecting all these items, farm machinery and gas engines, I guess the idea is to keep that history alive.
Yeah, I like to display them. I like to show them. I take them to shows all over the country, really.
Mm-hmm.
And I've acquired pieces from all over the world to add to the collection. One piece that I'm anxious to pick up, which I'm going to be doing in about 2 weeks, was a Schrader Headlight Company headlight for a steamboat. It was made here in Evansville and was at an auction in upstate New York. So I had one of my collector buddies pick it up, and I'm going to meet him at a show in Pennsylvania in 2 weeks to retrieve it. So,
Well, among the other items you have in this new building, you have several automobiles and a steam-powered boat that looks like a modern-day African Queen. First, tell me about those old cars you have,
Well,
Keith Kinney.
I've always liked Model T Fords, so I've got a couple of those. I've got a 1917 Willys Overland touring car. I've got my 1965 Mustang convertible that I got when I was in high school. And I've got a 1919 Model T Ford car that has a Hercules Better Business body on the back. And it was made by Hercules Body Works in Evansville, and they were made to just you take the body off of the Model T Ford and you slip this on, and now you've got a truck.
I also noticed a buggy you had.
All right, I've got a Hercules buggy, and I've got it actually hanging from the rafters in my barn right now because all these things take a lot of space.
Oh, they do. They do. Now, this boat you have, steam-powered?
It is steam powered. It's got a boiler that's, I don't know, about 2.5 feet in diameter and about 4 feet tall, and you burn either coal or wood in it, and it's called a launch. It was used a lot of times on lakes to get from one side of the lake to another, bigger lakes obviously. It's, I think, 21 or 22 feet long, and it'll hold the captain and probably 4 passengers, just made for cruising.
The original African Queen is still on the water. I think down in
Right.
Key Largo, Florida.
Right.
They take people out on the trips down there. And that was, I found it was built in 1912, I believe, in England. And it actually did do service in Africa. So,
Yeah.
It's an original African Queen.
Right.
So still floating, definitely. Now, when you find an item, do you do any restoration with it?
Yeah. Certainly earlier in my career, and I've been collecting since I was 14, just because of the economics of it, an unrestored engine that needs work or tractor that needs work is a lot less expensive than a restored one. So I did a lot of restoring back in my early days, and while I still do some, lately I've purchased more ready-to-run kind of things.
Now, but people might have seen these things in barns and in the corners and got cobwebs on them and just look like junk. And now this junk is valuable.
It can be, yeah.
So tell me about some of the more valuable items out there in auctions.
Well, some of these things you can you could purchase a new pickup for what some of these steam items or some of the big prairie tractors can cost.
We're talking hundreds of thousands?
Well, they can run that much. There was a auction a year or so ago in Illinois where I think it was a 1911 Case tractor made in Racine, Wisconsin, sold. And it's a beautiful tractor. And if I remember right, it sold for over $1.4 million. And to my knowledge, that's the most ever paid for something. I'm not in that arena of collecting.
All right. Now, some of the what about some of the stranger items that you might have in one of your barns?
Well, one of my more rare items is a Heilmann steam traction engine. It was made in Evansville by the Heilmann Machine Works, another very influential family that mostly predated William McCurdy. They started in the 1850s, and by the 1920s, were pretty much out of business. But this tractor is one of 5 that are known to still exist. It's the oldest, made in 1893, and only one of its era and design still around. And of course, you talked about the boat. That's kind of unusual.
Oh yeah, definitely.
Yeah. And then the gas engines that Hercules built. That's my primary focus. And I have one of every model that was produced, both here in Evansville and in Sparta, Michigan.
Any item on your wish list right now?
Oh, as a collector, there's always something else you'd like to have.
Unlimited resources.
Yeah.
Keith Kinney, what would you like to have in your barn?
Well, there's another Heilman steam traction engine a little bit later that I won't say I'm chasing, but I'm keeping tabs on.
Okay, all right. We will tip your hand on that. Now, is your wife a gearhead like you?
She puts up with it.
Okay.
And she's a trooper. She's never objected. I say, hey, how about we get this? Well, okay, if we can afford it, sure, go ahead. She has a couple engines and a couple of tractors that she claims as her own.
Oh, good.
And I actually, a couple of years ago, traded off one of her tractors, and I still hear about that. So I had to replace that.
Now, I want to end this conversation with the story about the links that a collector will go to bring home a prize, and you have had farm machinery shipped from Australia. Tell me about that, Keith.
Well, I have a good friend, and this internet has made the world so much smaller. And in the gas engine world, many collectors have joined together on the internet. And one of my good friends on the internet is Kerry Morris, lives in Australia. And in 2000, he came to the United States for 6 or 8 weeks with his wife, and they bought a used motorhome in the state of Washington and traveled across the country and made stops at other collectors' places. And they got to the East Coast, they sold it and flew home. Well, he spent a week with my family and I, and we just had a great time. And it was the week leading up to the Vandenberg County Fair. And at the time, both of my kids were in 4-H and working on Americana projects, restoring, each of them were restoring an old Hercules engine. And he and his wife joined in, and we had a great time that week working on things and just learning about each other's cultures. So after he got home, I was corresponding. I said, "So, Kerry, what engine that you saw in the States would you like to have?" And he says, "Well, of all of them I saw, I think a 15-horse Reed." Well, this is a engine that in bare bones is 5,000 pounds, and it's a little over 8 feet long and has 2 5-foot flywheels. I mean, it's a beast. And I said, well, let's find one, and I'll ship it to you. So we started on that project, and we found one and bought it, and I went to Ohio and retrieved it and came home, and we built a crate and put it in it and took it to Chicago and shipped it to Australia for him. Well, in 2017, we went to Australia and visited with him.
And you found something.
And imagine, I found an engine I liked. So he reciprocated, and he picked up the engine for me, put it in a crate, put it on in a shipping container, and a couple months later.
Now I know you know a lot of collectors around here, a lot of enthusiasts of farm machinery, and you guys get together often and show them off.
We do. There are shows almost in every county. And right now I'm chairman of the Southern Indiana Antique and Machinery Club. We have about 300 members, and we meet monthly, and then we have a show the second weekend of June every year, and then we put on the Winter Carnival at the 4-H Center in our show building out there every Christmas season. Mm-hmm. So, it's an unusual hobby. It's hard to explain to somebody that you collect what, but if you're a collector of, if you like it, there's collectors all over the world.
Well, when you fire one of these things up, mm-hmm. you get attention.
You do.
People will gather around. What's going on here?
Yeah. And what gathers more attention is when you're having problems with one and you can't get it to start. That's when people really
come out of the woodwork and try to help. Okay.
Yeah.
Well, Keith Kinney, thanks for sharing the history of these fantastic machines with us here on 2 Main Street. Now we go into the roaring 20s, but there was a recession of 1920 and 1921. Then the start of the Great Depression in 1929. Still, the Graham business did survive, right?
Indeed. In 28, the Grahams built more automobiles than any other brand new make to come on to the market. 29 was strong until October, when the crash of the market affected everyone. And they went from 77,000 cars a year down to 12,000 cars a year in 32 and 33. It was devastating for them. But again, as you mentioned, the Grahams were full of determination, grit, hard work. They never backed down, and they were always optimistic. So in 1932, they came out with the very first fully streamlined automobile called the Blue Streak. It had enclosed fenders. It had the radiator enclosed by the hood. It was so radically different and appealing that within 2 years, most of the industry had adopted that. But it was the Great Depression, and no matter how good your car was and how much less or expensive they made it, there simply weren't the funds. They sold less cars in 1935. In 1936, they sat back and they said, we sold 3,000 cars. We need to do something, otherwise we're going to go under. So they said, we're farm boys from Indiana. We've built a number of tractors that we didn't bring to production, but we know tractors. They got professional help in, top-end shelf. They designed the Graham Bradley tractor. It was streamlined, just like their automobile in 32. It was very powerful. It was one of the very, very few tractors that had an automobile engine in it. And you wonder, well, why would you want to do that? Well, they detuned it so it would be really powerful in the field. But they also made it so that you had a gear that could take your crops to the processing plant, to the buyers and such. You could go at the amazing speed of 25 miles an hour with the Graham Bradley tractor. So they've got the tractor, they've got everything sorted out, and then they realized, which they knew, but they said, we can overcome anything if we just keep working harder. They said, we have no distribution system for tractors. We have car dealerships, but we don't have tractor dealerships. And we're going to be against companies like Case, Oliver, John Deere, International Harvester. They've been serving tractors buyers for years, repairing them, and they've developed a bond. And we're starting right from scratch. How in the world can we possibly merchandise this tractor successfully and soon enough to make it good? Well, couple hundred miles away, the world's largest merchandiser was located, called Sears and Roebuck, with catalogs that have over 1,000 pages, and many of those pages were geared towards rural living, people that couldn't go to the store and buy a dress or to buy shoes and such. They're 35 miles away from anywhere. Well, with rural-free delivery, they were able to get these things delivered to them. It's been said you could outfit an entire farm with buying implements and pails and tools and such right from the Sears catalog. So there were meetings in 1936 about, can we do something like this? And Sears was enthusiastic. Graham thought this was the answer to their problems because, indeed, not only would Sears be merchandising to every rural country farm in the country, but the Sears farm stores, which usually accompanied the Sears stores downtown, they would service them. And they said, this is terrific. The Grahams, they Sears executives came to the farms up in Washington.
Yeah,
They
you talk about the trials.
Right, the
in your
trials
book.
in front of the executives, that turned out very, very well. They said, let's do this. In July of 1937, the grand opening was in Washington, Indiana. There were so many celebrities there from the agricultural world, the paper just couldn't get all their names in. It was the president of Sears was there, and everyone on down.
And they were wearing pith helmets a lot.
Yeah, they issued pith helmets, and there were canes, white canes. So you see everybody walking around in these snazzy, and you see these executives out in the fields in their white shoes and their suits on, and they're looking at a tractor that's up to, in this mud and plowing the field. So it in retrospect, it's kind of funny, but it was the real deal. This is how you did business back then. And Sears said, we're going to order 2,500 tractors, and we're going to put them into Sears catalog in fall. We promise you 2 full pages, and this is our tractor. So this is great. Again, everything is falling in line. This is going to be perfect. And Sears says, we know it's going to start slow, but we'll have patience. Don't worry about that. So the Sears catalog comes out in the fall of 1937, early 1938, and on page 1022, you open it up, and the top half of 2 pages are Graham Bradley. The bottom half are Bradley Implements. Bradley company was owned by Sears, so that was their own thing. And they're saying, well, okay, that we didn't get what we wanted. The preceding page had the Sears economy tractor. Unbeknownst to Grahams, they had also contracted with another company to make a bare bones $495 featureless tractor that was underpowered. That got a full page, and it had the price prominently listed. When you turned the page to get the top 2, there was no advertised price on it. For some inexplicable reason, Sears decided to keep that a secret, and you'd have to go to a Sears store to find out what it was. Everyone assumed that this streamlined, powerful, automobile-engined tractor has to be the Rolls-Royce or the Cadillac. Compared to that, it was $1,030 compared to $495 for stripped-down nothing. People did not want to even ask about it because they knew that it was way too expensive.
Sure.
And if you look too, and the depression has been studied for years and years, and there's all kinds of opinions about that. But once things started getting better in 35, 36, 37, Franklin Roosevelt was kind of yielding to the pressure. Well, things started to get better. And when they got better, he said, well, this is terrific. Let's put back in the old things. And there was a Roosevelt recession. There was a recession within the recession just when Grahams were coming out with their tractor. So it was absolutely the worst possible time.
I think that, the Grahams called this a business betrayal.
What happened is that when they said, fine, we will sign up for 2,500 tractors, and you will set up, the Grahams had set up what they called temporary tools, an assembly line with temporary tools to make the first 241 for the trials and for prototypes and such. And Sears says, oh, those are great. And Graham says, well, now we need to set up an assembly line, a real deal, so we can make 5,000 a year, 10,000 a year, $25,000 to do that. And Sears says, we'll pay half of that. Well, what happened is that when it did not take off immediately, who buys the tractor in December or January? You wait to the appropriate time. It did not take off, and people were scared because there was no price. They knew they couldn't afford it because it must be a $2,000 tractor. It's so good looking. It's so advanced. All the features are included. It's not like the add-ons for the other ones here. And by the fall of 1938, Sears had pretty much just given up on them. The advertising became less in regional catalogs. There were less by stores. Again, for the most part, there's a couple examples where they did, but for the most part, the price was never, ever advertised. And Sears just basically quit on them. And if you study the annual financial reports for Graham Page, and they've got that $25,000, $12,000 due to customer, it said, 38, 39, 40. Sears never, ever paid their half of setting up the assembly line. They never properly advertised this. They gave absolutely no support while they continued to push the Sears economy tractor, which was the bare bones tractor. The Sears farm stores that were going to service Graham tractors, well, they were used to servicing lawnmowers and garden tillers. They didn't know anything about car engines or brand new ones, so there was completely a facile attempt on their part to encourage one of their products. But when you look at the 1,200-page catalog, they say, well, this is one product. We've got 1,100 and whatever, 1,200 pages of other products.
Sure.
They gave up on them, and as I said to one person, I said, after 1938, I don't think the members of the Graham families ever ordered anything from the Sears catalog again.
Now, in 1938, you mentioned 1938.
Yes.
The another Graham car, the Spirit of Motion, came out. Then you had the Graham Hollywood car.
While all this was going on with the tractors and the betrayal, like you said, from Sears, and trying to break into a brand new market, and Robert Graham was the salesman. He was all over the country talking to conventions and farm gatherings and this sort of thing. While all that's going together, again, the car business is just going downhill. So in 1938, they said, let's do just what we did in 32. We're going to build an even more futuristic, more streamlined, more radical car. Problem was there wasn't that much money in 38 again, and it was a car that you either loved or you hated it. And there weren't that many people that would want to spend that kind of money on a new car for a car that was iffy at best. It won awards in France. The French just loved it, but in the United States, you'd say, and it had a very advanced nose, and they gave it a nickname, and it was horrible. But the Grahams never, ever gave up. They were optimistic. Well, that didn't work. We're going to buy the dies from the 36 Cord, and we're going to modify that into the Graham Hollywood. It looked a lot better than the Cord did. By then, the winds of war were blowing, and who wants to buy a new car that probably will be an orphan make in a year or two because they're not doing so well, in the marketplace. And there's some bad news coming from Europe and from the Far East.
Now, during the World War II, wartime production, I know the Graham Enterprises worked on engines for the B-24 bombers and the Alligator Rescue Craft and the landing craft, the Beaver. So they branched into all kinds of different.
What happened is the Grahams had not made a profit since 1932, and they were still in business in 1939, mostly because Joe Graham and the Graham family kept pumping money in there because they felt they had a moral obligation to the employees and to their customers. When they started doing defense work in September of 1940, there were no customer decisions to be made. The government said, we want these particular things. We want this being made. Their factory was open. The government was very prescient about that. They had thought ahead, saying something's going to happen. Mm-hmm. So they started, when you talk about the Alligator, which is their most famous, they were called Amtraks, amphibious tractors. And that's why in the book, there's a tractor, World War II tractor chapter. These are the ones like on D-Day and wherever. The ships bring the soldiers in, they get close, they drop the front, they run out onto the beach, and they attack. So they did that very, very efficiently. The government gave them awards for the design, for production, for the morale of the people during the war and such. And during the war, towards the end of the war, Joseph Graham decided to retire. Robert had retired a year beforehand. They were doing so poorly, he said, you can't afford a salary for me, so I'm going to step back. Joseph Fraser, later of Kaiser Fraser Frame, became president of Graham Page, and he expanded that even more. So Graham was making money by the end of the war. By 1944 and 1945, their profits were such, because they were so efficient, that the excess profits tax took half of their income and donated it back to the war effort. One year, I think they made $2 million, and they had to pay back $950,000, something like that, which is okay. But Joseph Fraser, who had been involved with automobile companies since the 20s, bought Graham Page because he wanted Graham Page cars after the war. And long story short, it melded into Kaiser Fraser, a really complicated thing. But he also had the idea that he wanted to continue with Graham tractors. He contracted with a design company out in California, and came up with some really interesting and streamlined and almost space-age designs for tractors, and I was able to get copies of those renderings are in the book. The thing is that Joe Fraser's best years as a merchandiser were behind him as an industrialist, and those tractors, a couple of them made to prototype stage, radically different, very much more conventional, never made it to production. He kept promising that they were coming, so he bought the rototiller rights, and he came out with the rototiller garden thing, and of course that was a bust. Who wanted that? They were looking for a Graham tractor. And again, as you had mentioned, what happened is that after Joe Fraser retired, the board of directors, which still had some funds left, hired a hotshot Wall Street stock dealer. And he came in, and it became fabulously successful. Again, you talk about the sports team, you talk about Madison Square Garden. They were one of the biggest investors on Wall Street. They got very, very, very involved. And again, the story is told in the book, but through corporate transitions, between buyouts, between selling off the sports teams and this and that, it got farther and farther away from Graham Page Motors Corporation. The 1963 New York phone book is the last listing for Graham Page Motors Corporation. And again, it transitioned, and it got lost in a corporate umbrella. However, the original Graham Page company now owns the cable license for New York City. So again, they are prospering.
Now, in your epilogue of the book, you say the Graham Bradley tractor was a business failure, but the family history is a story of American grit.
Exactly that. They could have easily just retired as millionaires after they sold their glass holdings.
Sure.
After they were with Dodge, they were ensconced as life as on the board of directors, and the 51% of theirs was millions of dollars. They could have sat on the beach and drank pina coladas for the rest of their lives. They did not do that. What they did is they took that capital and said, we're moral businessmen. We want to employ people. We want to make people's lives better. We're going to make these trucks. We're going to make better trucks and such. And we're going to take this capital and we're going to show how ethical and moral businessmen can succeed in the motor car industry through style, strength, and value. They're always talking about value of their profits. Okay, so they go through the Depression, and then the war starts, and again, they're making money, not on the things they want to do, but they were serving their country. Robert Graham's big thing, ever from the start, was to sell is to serve. Now, you don't hear that very often anymore, but he felt that if he sold well, he represented his products, whatever they were, in the best possible way, and they served people, both sides of the equation, profited in a proper manner.
Now, the Graham family farming business
yes,
is
the
still...
Graham farms are still in Washington, Indiana. They used to have large herds of cattle, and they were famous for supplying armor with turkeys. There was all sorts of things now. And again, generational changes have taken place. And now, for the most part, again, it's just as large, it's just as profitable, but they kind of rent the land out. And it's kind of done in that manner now. Graham Farms were the foundation. The profits of the Graham Farms were the foundations for the glass industry success, for the truck industry success, for the automobile success. If that wasn't successful, none of these things would have happened. So there is a inborn loyalty to the Graham Farms, and I don't see that changing anytime soon.
Well, it's a very interesting book. You have all kinds of footnotes at the end of each chapter, which are just as interesting as the chapter I found. And also you have in there some toys that are related to the family history.
Farm families are like every other family, where there were pedal cars. When the Grahams came out, there were pedal tractors. There were Auburn, Indiana, famous for making toys. They made miniature Graham Bradley tractors, which oddly enough were advertised in the Sears catalog as well, with the price fully shown. There were a number of people in years hence afterwards that cast either out of aluminum or out of iron, and they made really kind of neat tractors, and they're very, very, very collectible. But I was nearing the end of my manuscript where Chad Elmore, one of my technical advisors, said, "You need to check this out, Michael." And I said, "Well, okay, fine." It turned out to be the most fun part to write, and to me, one of the most interesting parts to write, because we all know the popularity of Legos.
Mm-hmm.
Now, you can go into a toy store, and I mean, they've got all kinds of kits that you can put together, and they're rather expensive. But just like anything, people take things to an extreme. So there's something called the MOC in Lego communities called My Own Creation. In other words, what the company provides isn't good enough. We're going to make our own. So there was an engineer whose brother owned a Graham Bradley tractor, and there was a really precise model made of it, and he kind of surreptitiously borrowed that model from his brother and took it home, and he designed a Lego Graham Bradley tractor.
Have a new perspective now, don't we?
Indeed.
Thanks a lot, Michael.
No, thank you very much. And again, I'm very appreciative that you took the time to help discover.
I'm David James, and this is 2 Main Street.